So this is a simple application we configured, and I showed you how to create a functional component, how we can design a functional component and use functional component. So in React.js, we learned about working with functional components. So how we can design the component. Now another option is how we can create class components, how we can design and create class components, configuring and designing the class components. Let's see how we can design the elements. Generally, components can be a functional one, and a component can be a class. We need to use according to the situation. So functional components are, as I told you, they are designed with JavaScript functions. So, and how to design, one example we have seen. Now let's see how we can design class components. Class components. Actually, components can be designed by using ES6 classes, means JavaScript classes, instead of functions. So the components designed with class. Component designed with class is called as class component. What is advantage of class component is a class component can be extended. That means functional components are difficult for extending. Suppose if I want later to extend its functionality by adding more changes into that, functional components are always risky. Class advantage is reusability will be there, extensibility will be there, and a clean separation is configured. And a class can handle multiple functionalities inside it. It can handle multiple functionalities. But how to create a class component? Let's see one example, how we can create a class component. To create class component, so let's go to our file, app.js. Okay. In app.js, we have to create a class. And the class is just like a JavaScript class. And the class name can be anything. I given the class name as login. This login class extends. It should extend the base class. Base class is every component should extend react.component. That is the base class. React.component is the base class. That means all React components are derived from the React component base class. So when you are designing a class component, you have to make sure that you are implementing that React component base class. Actually, React component base class is present in the React library. You can see we have embedded the React library. This is the React library. The React library is React development.js and React DOM.development.js. These libraries will provide you that React component base class. We need to configure the React component base class. And this class have to return some presentation and render the presentation. So then how do we define? So generally class have to render some presentation by using a render method. By using render method, it will return a presentation. So now render have to use the return to return a presentation. So we need to return the presentation. What it should return, you have to design. Yesterday I told you, if you are presenting multiple lines, use an empty representation here, empty element, or you can write your containers, divs and spans, and you can design them. So this is how we create a class component. Class component is defined in this way. So in the class component, generally you need a render method. That render method will tell what to return, and what to return is defined by using the return keyword. It should return the presentation. So every component class must render and return some presentation, and what it has to present, that you can directly write here. So I am writing a heading, so it should present like user login, and here it can use a data list and a data term, some username, and a text box. Input type is equal to text. So and make sure that this is empty, means self-ending. Okay, another data term is password, and here data definition, input type is equal to password, and we just kept a button, and let's keep this login. This is a login screen, but this login screen is designed by using a class component. After designing the class component, now this component should be rendered into this root div. Then what we have to do is, after designing that component, we need to just add here the render method. We need to add the render method. So we need to configure and define the render method. So how do we specify the render method? Let's see how we can configure render method. That means React DOM dot render is the method, and what it should render and where to render, you have to tell that. It's like same how you defined for functional component also. That means what to render and where to render, here we have to define. So we need to render login, so login to render, okay, comma, where to render, so document dot get element by id root, into that root element it should render. That's how we are configured. Now this app.js is designed, a component is designed by using, it is designed by using class component. So it is designed by using class technique. So we can create a function or we can create a class. So a functional component or a class component, depending on the situation, we need to handle it. We need to configure and handle it. And so we can now link this app.js to our HTML index page. And let's start this and see. So I cannot directly run this. So I will use a simple ng start here. Currently it's okay. Why? Because we are not using a separate application. It is using some bootstrap. Now how to apply the bootstrap For the body section, use a class as container fluid. Okay. So that it will keep the appearance in a better way. Now this is designed by using the class component. This is designed by using the class component. So how we define the class component and how we can handle the class component. So generally, class components are configured in this way. Now, many times in interview, the question is asked, what is different functional component and class component? That's a very regular question here. So when to use them according to the situation, but what is difference between the components? So functional component and class, because we can do the same work using a functional component also. Yesterday we saw that instead of class we created a login function, and in that login function we defined what to return. Now today we are creating a class, and in the class we are designing. Remember, class should extend React component based class, and class should render and return the presentation. Now what is difference? That is most commonly asked question is, so what is difference between functional component versus class component? What is difference between them? Actually, remember one point, functional components are referred as stateless components. So they are stateless components. Stateless means, what is problem in stateless? Stateless because they do not hold or manage state. That means automatically once they are finished, they automatically destroy the memory. Whatever the memory allocated from them will be destroyed. Actually, HTTP is a stateless protocol. That means it cannot remember the information. So what is stateless? I will tell you one simple point, observe carefully, because it is most commonly used word in web technologies. So for example, we have web server. So this is a HTTP server. So generally HTTP is stateless. It is HTTP is stateless protocol. We call HTTP as stateless protocol. What is meaning of stateless protocol is, now what happens is, from the client you make a request. So you are making a request of one component, function 1. That means we have function 1 and function 2. Now when you make a request for function 1, that function 1 will be loaded into the memory of server. It is loaded into the memory of server. Okay. Now it will process and it will send a response back. Function 1 will send a response back to the client. But important point here is, after sending response back to the client, this memory is cleaned up. It is cleaned up. Now after function 1, now the function 2 loads into memory. And this function 2 have to use the data left by function 1. Whatever data left by function 1, it should use the data, but it is no longer available. It is cleaned up, deleted. When function 2 is requested, function 2 memory will be loaded. Function 1 will be destroyed. But in function 1, we have some values which we want to use in function 2. Now it is not possible. It is not possible because it is stateless. It cannot carry information from one location to another. So it uses a lot of round trips. It is very slow. So it is very slow, but it is more secured and it manages memory well. Why? Because automatically once it finished using, it will destroy. It is tightly coupled. It is not good and easy for extending. That is the problem with functional component. Functional component. I will tell you stateless in a general example also. Stateless means, imagine, suppose you logged into Google. Imagine you logged into Google. So you logged into your Google account. In the first screen, it has asked your user ID password. Okay, you entered user ID password and logged in. After login, you have seen that you have 10 mails. That is your index page. Now you want to watch second mail. When you want to watch your second mail, then you click on second mail. Then again it has to connect with server. When again it has to connect with server, then if server cannot remember your information, if server cannot remember your previous information, then it will ask you to log in again. That means, imagine, for every email you have to log in and verify. That is very difficult. That is stateless. Stateless means after providing you the response, it is deleted from the memory. So that is good and that is not great in several occasions. That is good because memory is well managed. It is more secured. But bad because if I want to carry data across several pages and use the data across pages, then it is difficult. So functional components do not have state. So due to that, we call them as stateless. Whereas class components are called stateful. Class components are stateful. Class are stateful. Class components are stateful components. Stateful components. Actually, so class contains both logic and data. And it is good for transporting data across components. It can have a local state where it can store the value and use the value. It is not just a class, but it is a container with a lot of things like constructor, properties, methods, accessors, everything. It is loosely coupled architecture also. So it is easy to extend, it is easy to maintain the class components. Extend and maintain the class components. So generally, when we are working with components, if you don't want to maintain state, you don't want to carry forward the operations, you want that operation to finish and stop, then better create functional components. If you want the data to be accessed and used across, then better you go with the class components so that it can maintain a state for you and it can manage the state for you. How to maintain state and how we can manage state in a class component, how we can store the values and use the values. Let's see one simple example. Actually, to manage the values, there are two techniques. So the values can be accessed. The values can be accessed by using general. They can be accessed by using properties and by using state. Again, what is difference between properties and state? So, and how the properties and states are used, we need to understand that. Let's see one simple example, how we can define properties. and how we can use the properties in the application. In the same way, how you can use a state and work with the state in the application. So that is the basic thing we have to learn. So let's see one simple example how we can configure and how we can define. Let's see example. That means now once you know about the difference between the class components and functional components. Remember, when functional and class components, they can be nested also. Nested, okay. I will show you first nested, then we can talk about data. Let's see. Observe carefully now what we are doing. I am creating, so this is suppose header component. Header component. So how to design the header component? So what we will do now is, so we will create a class, and the class name header component, and this extends react dot component. It extends react dot component. Okay, that is, so react dot component. So that is the header component. Now in the header component, it should render and return. It should render and return a simple div, or here I will give a header. Okay, you know that these are all HTML elements. So we are using a header. Header is a HTML element. And inside the header, I will keep a heading. So Amazon shopping, that is the heading. Okay. So this is header component. We designed a component called header. Okay. Next, create another component. So class, another component. And the component is suppose footer component. And the footer component also extends React component. So every component should extend React component only, and it should render and return. It should render and return some footer. In the footer, I will keep here some italic. So here I will add as ampersand copy and copyright 2021, something like this. So Amazon. This is footer component. We have a header and footer component. And we are designing another component called section component. And this extends the React dot component base, and it should render and it should return the section. It should return the section area. In this section area, we are defining some content. So just I will put a paragraph. This is so Amazon shopping, Amazon online shopping, something like this. I define some paragraph or some content must be there. Now you designed a lot of components now. Header component, footer component, and a section component. Now I am creating a main component. So extends React dot component. I am creating a main component. This main component, actually, so should render and return. It should render and return. Here I am writing as a div. Inside this div, we will keep at the top. First, we will define header. So we will define header component. After header component, we will render section component. After section component, we will render footer component. So like this, we are integrating all other components into one. So main component contains all these components designed. And it's your wish. In any order you want, you can configure. So this is header first, then section, then footer. Now, when you design, it's your wish to configure the styles how you want. That means, for example, I want to define header. So section. So section, I have to define some height. So we can give CSS and apply. Later CSS we will give. Initially, the main component contains all these components. This main component should be rendered into index page. Then React DOM dot render. It should render the main component. It should render the main component into document get element by ID. So root. And the main component contains all other components designed. The main component contains all other components designed. So this is the approach how you follow a component inside another component. A component inside another component. You can define component inside another component. Now I will save this now. This main component is rendered into the root. And when I run this, so you can see all this is working fine. That means we have a header, we have a section, and we have a footer. Now the styles for this component, you can define in a separate style sheet. And you can link the style sheet. Or you can directly write the styles. Generally, so if you want styles for app.js, we design some components. Now what we do is, generally, we will add another file. So app.css. In that file, we are configuring. So we are configuring some section or say header. For header, we are defining some background color. So some color and color as some white and text align to center. And for footer, so same background color, so as color and color as white and text align to center. And for section, so we are defining, so height as some 400 pixel. Now this app.css must be used in our index page. Here in the index page, we will link that CSS also here. So link relation is equal to style sheet and href is equal to .. slash, so src slash app.css. That CSS file will be linked here. And you can see that those effects will come and display. So this is a combination of several components. It is a combination of several components. It completely depends on how you design, how you configure your content. So a React application is a collection of several components. It is a collection of several components. And usually every component can be designed as a class component or as a functional component. Now the difference between the class and functional component is, so the functional components usually are difficult for extending. Functional components are difficult for extending. So, and they are stateless. They cannot store the data of what operations it has performed and carry the data across requests. It cannot carry the data across requests. So generally, how we can use this in a nested way, that is what I showed you. And remember, a component can contain another component inside it. That means now inside this header, footer section, we can add some more inside it. Inside the section, we can add another component. So we can design directly or we can create another component. So what I done here is I created 3 components and I rendered all the 3 components here. Remember, you don't need to render all directly like this. You can design and render. According to your requirements, you can design and render. Why? Because alignments and indentation completely depends on your requirement only. For example, suppose I have another component class called nav component. Nav component. So this extends react.component, and the nav component is rendering and it is returning a simple nav bar. It is returning a simple nav bar with some unordered list item like home, so like about, like contact, a simple nav bar I am designing. Now our intention is this nav bar should be displayed in the left side of this entire page. In this single page application, it should display the left side and configure that. So generally, now how you will keep that, when you design here, you see now in the main component, this is the main component. When we are designing our content, we can use all the knowledge of CSS, Bootstrap, whatever we have learned. So I can write like this, see, div. So this is having the class as class name is equal to row. And in that we have a div. So this is having, so in that row, and here we are defining a header first. That means header component at the top. Header component at the top, and we are having a div. And I told you that multiple components cannot be rendered. So what you need to do is we need to enclose that in an empty. You have to enclose that in an empty element. And here we first use header component. After header component, we will keep a div, and this div will have a row. So class name is equal to row. In the row, we have div, and this is class name. Class name is equal to call3, and another div, and the class name. So class name is equal to call9, right? And in this left column, I want to render the nav component. So we have to use the nav component. And in the right side, we need to render, so the section component, we need to define the section component. And after this row, then we put a footer component. That is how we create nested. That means a component can have another component inside. You can configure the components in a multi-level hierarchy, and we can present that content and display the content. And I will save this here, and finally this component is rendered. It will be like this. So everything same. Only the point here, you are designing every component independently and integrating that and displaying that into one location. That is the basic hierarchy we have to use for designing the component. Remember, such complex designs we can do with functional component also. So currently I designed through the class component. Instead of class, we can use a functional component also, and we can define through the functional component, which we will see how we can manage that. But this is a simple hierarchy of components. So that is the reason when you see the websites, for example, I will show you a website like some Twitter. Twitter is a website. Twitter is an application designed with, it is an application designed with actually React. So Twitter is designed with React. You can see in the Twitter, everything is considered as component. That means this is a heading component. So this is bottom, we have footer component, left side banner component. When I open login, this is a login component. So we can design everything like components and configure as components. So either it is functional or it is the class components. Now, how we can handle the data in the components and how we can manage the data inside the components. Let's see how we can handle that. So this is an example of the presentations. That means how we can handle the components, keep a component inside another component and display. Now let's see how we can access and how we can handle the data in our application. Access and handle the data in our applications, configuring the data in the application. Let's see one simple example, how we can handle the data. So this is just designing with all the components, but sometimes component can have some data that we want to display. Data need to be displayed in some location. We want to display the data. For example, we have section component. In the section component, I want to present some data. In the section component, if you want to present some data, you can define data here for that component. Generally, data is stored in properties, So, or it is stored in state. What is difference between properties and state? We will see. Generally, properties nothing but I will create here. So product name, that is a property is equal to, so some Nike casuals, that is the property. And we have product price, and into that we pass some value. And we have photo, and here we have some photo path. That means I have some images folder. In that there is an image. So images / shoe.jpg. Now these values need to be displayed inside the section. That means now inside the section, so under that Amazon online shopping, here I want to create a div. And I will keep the class name as card. And here I am designing a div and class name. So class name is equal to card header. And in this, I want to display the heading and get that product name. It is present in a property. And the properties in a class, so here we use an embedded expression. Embedded expressions are defined in the curly brace. Here classes are accessed, class members are accessed by using this keyword, this dot the product name. And similarly, and another div, and we have defined the class name. Class name is equal to card body. And here I want to display the image. Then I will use here image, img src. The image is coming from photo location. So width and height I am defining as 100 and height as 100. And image also a self-ending element you configured. And I want to display the price here, div, and the class name is equal to card footer. And we need to define a heading which can display this dot product price. Now you see here in the section, the presentation will be like this. That means we are configuring the presentation and defining the presentation inside the section area. So this is the basic approach, generally how you follow for presenting. Everything is designed as a component and injected into your application. That is why it is component based. It is component based. So how we can configure the properties? So we can configure the properties of any component by using this technique. We can configure the properties by using this technique. Now important is how we can use state. But what is problem with the properties? The main problem with the properties, they are not allowed to access across the request. They are not allowed to access across the requests. To access across the requests, you need to maintain a state. We need to configure the state and we need to maintain the state. By using state, we can store the values, we can manage the values and use them. So two options are there. Either you can go with the properties or state. Mostly functional components completely depend on properties, and class components will completely depend on state. So how to handle and work with the state. So you have seen how to design the components in a multi-level hierarchy and how do we render the component into this. Now we will see how these components can handle data. So data binding in Angular using two options are there. One is props, there is properties. Another one we have state. We need to configure with the help of state. So by using properties and state, we can handle data binding. And one important is actually you have learned in Angular, actually you have seen properties and state will be there in Angular also. Actually properties and attribute will be there. Okay. And data by, and one more point is Angular supports two-way binding. Angular supports two-way binding, but data binding in React, it can handle by using properties, and it can handle by using state, and it can support only. So React supports one-way binding. It will not support two-way binding. Then how we can manage the data coming to this application? To manage data binding, we have to depend on state and events. We have to learn how to write the events, how to manage the state and access. That means how to collect the data from the form, store the data, and interact with the data. That's the approach how we can manage in our React application. We have to see that. We will see in our next session, right? Tomorrow we will discuss about that. So tomorrow we will see how data binding works in React. So today we have seen how to design different components. So class component, functional components, nested components. Then tomorrow we will discuss about data binding. Then we will learn how to interact with server-side API. Just like Angular, how to interact with server-side API, get the data and present the data. That we will see in our next session, right? Yeah.
दुकान वाला ट्राई करके ये जाने कौन बात नहीं है